Hello, welcome to Model Aviation Live. I'm your host, Jay Smith, executive editor of Model Aviation Magazine. And today our guest is going to be Derek Micko. He's been on before, but we've got a really exciting project that we're going to share. But before we bring him out, there's a couple of quick things that I wanted to share that you might find interesting. One is that when I attended the donation, when Sal Calvagna donated his giant scale aircraft to the was the Sikorsky Miromets, when he donated it to the Air Force Museum back in October of last year, I got to meet a gentleman named Dan Patterson, and Dan was working on a follow-up book to the American Eagles. They'd written one, and they were doing a follow-up book to celebrate the anniversary of the United States Air Force and also celebrate the anniversary of the Dayton Air Force Museum. Interestingly enough, the Dayton Air Force Museum is older than the Air Force, and that's just because up until 1947 the Air Force was part of the Army. So that's why. So it's 100 years of the museum and 75 years of the Air Force. But anyway, so we had lunch, and I was made aware that there was a brand new book that Dan was releasing, a new version with much updated information. So here it is, American Eagles, second edition, a history of the United States Air Force, featuring the National Museum of the United States Air Force. And as you can see, it's the Memphis Belle on the cover, which is on display at the Dayton Air Force Museum. It's a great resource. So I did a review on it. We were fortunate enough to receive it just a few days before release. So I went ahead and posted on, not on modelaviation.com, but on the AMA website, modelaircraft.org. In the blog section, I posted my full review, about 500 words and a picture of the book, but it'll also be an worth a closer look. So there's a sneak peek at that. And the other thing that I want to share with you is many years ago, I created the About Us articles in Model Aviation. And those were articles that tell the history of companies in our industry. And that started out with Dubrow, who was celebrating their 50th anniversary. And that was the very first one. And then from that time, I've done probably 18 or 20 articles. So not only is it great to celebrate companies within our industry, it's also great because there's always a giveaway. Every time we do an About Us, you can win something. And so the most recent one that I've just completed, which will be in the July issue, is about Gator RC, who is a great supporter of our magazine and a great supporter of AMA. And they have agreed to give away the airplane that you see on your screen right now. It's retail value $1,295, an F4U Goodyear FG1D 62cc limited edition from Seagull Models. So if that interests you, you can win that plane for free. All you have to do is read the July issue, either when it comes out in June, either the digital edition or print, and all the information on how you can enter to win that airplane will be included in the article. So I just wanted to share that. I hope that everyone will participate and try to win it. And, we will draw one winner and notify them. So make sure to check out the July issue if you're at all interested in winning that. As I mentioned, our guest today is Derek Micko. He's actually been on the show more than any guest, but that's because he keeps producing really cool airplanes and he loves talking about them. He loves sharing tips about them. And I don't want to give too much away, but there's something pretty exciting about this article. I mean, beyond the construction article itself. Derek and I talked, and we are going to let the readers decide what the next project Derek works on. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes after we introduce Derek. But I'm just excited that the readers will be able to pick, and there will be some options, and we'll talk about it today on the show, so you'll know what the options are. But I'd like to welcome Derek to the show. Hey, Derek.
Hey, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I didn't want to share too much, but I'm pretty excited about this article that you have, this new construction article, but also, for the first time, that let the readers pick. We're going to give them, I think it's 6 or 8 aircraft, and they get to pick which one they want. So we'll get into that in just a few moments, but let's share with us your newest project.
Sure. So the latest project, the one that's going to be in the June issue, is a Park Flyer Dornier 335 feel, or aero. And it was a late World War II aircraft. The full size was actually a twin-engined airplane. It had one in the front and a motor in the rear, so push-pull. But for simplicity purposes, it's just the motor up front for the design. So the design includes, of course, the wing, the fuselage, the tail section, all that standard stuff. But I have also included some other unique things about it that we can kind of detail the model up if you want to. One of the unique features about this airplane, and I think we talked slightly about it on the last call, was the model features retracts. So it's only 34 inches in wingspan, but there's a lot of detail in this small size.
Absolutely. And, I also appreciate that you added, I believe, a Kble Wagon to some of the pictures. That kind of, and it looks fairly scaled to your airplane.
Yeah, it was. So there's one of the features on these models is I try and include some extra details put in the airplane. So this one has gear doors, it has a cockpit, it has wheel well details, that sort of thing. And I also wanted to kind of have something when I was doing the static shots for the article, something to add a little bit extra in there. So I came up with the idea of doing a Kble Wagon. So I was able to find a design for a card paper model online. So I took that, modified it quite a bit, and was able to size it so it's basically the right scale for the model. And I included those designs if you want to build one for yourself. That's included with the detail sheets you can download off of Model Aviation.
Perfect. Well, I know you've got the actual model there. Why don't you, if you don't mind, show viewers the actual model and take us through some of the interesting features that you've incorporated?
Sure. Let's slide back a little bit here because even though it's a park flyer, a little bit of space. So here's the model. It weighs about 16 to 17 ounces with the battery pack ready to go. As you can see, it is a stick and tissue style model. And one of the features that we offer along with the plans download and the other templates is the tissue templates. So this is tissue that you run through your printer and you actually print all the colors. So all the insignias that you see on here, all the other details, like the insignias, the tail number, all that stuff is printed directly onto the tissue itself. And I've got a couple of videos showing on how to do that. And I also talked about, like I said, in the last time we met, there was some information in there on how to apply the tissue. One of the things that's, like I said, unique about this airplane is it has retracts. I'm going to go ahead and manually extend them here. What's slightly different about the retracts on this model is they're not an actual retract unit. If I get my hand in there. There we go. But they are actually servos that the struts are mounted to directly. So I'm not sure if this will show it very well. Probably not. Maybe in the nose gear. But there's a servo in each one of these wheel bays that easy connectors are added to the servo horn itself, and then the strut is mounted to that. So that's kind of one of the neat features about this airplane. Some other neat features is, like I said, the plans are available through Model Aviation. If you want to do a short kit, that's available through Monzano Laserworks. So Monzano does really nice work, and there's 3/32 balsa wood, 1/4 inch balsa wood, and then 1/8 light ply as part of that short kit. So really neat way to get the model building faster for you. You don't have to hand cut parts that way. Some other neat features about it are some 3D printed parts from Rabbit Models. So this spinner is available from them as a 3D printed part. All the wheels and rims, those are 3D printed. And then a newer item that we just sort of designed for this airplane, and we're adding more to the other lines of aircraft that I have, are strut covers. So kind of like the old Robart strut covers that you could you could have where you actually just put it right over the wire strut. Same process as in this one here.
Very nice.
The model is powered like the other Park Flyers that I have with the 24-gram motor. I've done 2 prototypes, one that has a 1700 kV motor, and I fly that one on 2S and a 900 milliamp battery pack. And then this one flies on a 1300 kV, but a 3S 900 pack. And both of them are about the same in performance, oddly enough. I thought that the 3S, and that's what we're seeing on the video here, is the 3S airplane, might be slightly faster, and it possibly is, but for the most part, they're pretty comparable. So it really just depends on what the modeler wants to do when they build it.
So obviously, of this coming out in the June issue, those that get digital can already see the article now in the digital edition that came out on the 15th, but print, it'll probably be about a week or so, or maybe slightly longer before they see it. So tell us a little about, while we're watching the video, if you would, take us a little bit through what it's like flying it, and any tips for, successful, if someone builds it, tips for a successful maiden flight.
Well, I would say with any model that you're maiden for the first time, make sure you do a good range check. Make sure you make sure that all the control surfaces are going in the correct direction as you're expecting them, weight and balance, all those sorts of things. Whether you're building the airplane as a hand launch, you also have the option, if you didn't want to do the landing gear with retracts, you can do plug-in gears. There's templates to be able to do that as well. But really just sort of put it into the wind and gradually apply full power if you're taking off the ground. Go full throttle if you're hand launching. And the airplane flies pretty smoothly. I didn't have to do too much so far as trim. The video that we're showing right now, that's actually this airplane's second flight. So I was getting pretty comfortable in bringing it in close and doing some mild aerobatics, albeit not my best roll that I've ever done, but still getting used to the airplane. But and then landing is pretty straightforward as well. You just line it up and just gradually pull back the power to maybe about a quarter of the throttle, and then just let the airplane settle in on itself and flare. And it lands pretty softly, even with the long landing gear. Those tires that are 3D printed, they're not solid. They're kind of supple, so there's a little bit of give when you land, a little bit of shock absorption. So you can see here we're coming in on final, and the model just settles in quite nicely.
Very nice. So obviously you've designed a lot of models in the Park Flyer size range, and thinking about this model and how it flies, would you say it's one of the more easier ones to fly, or is it one of the more challenging ones to fly?
I would say it's more on the easy side. So all of my Park Flyers, I utilize a Clark Y airfoil, which is the classic flat bottom that has been on thousands and thousands of designs, and so it makes for a nice flying airplane. You could fly it inverted if you wanted to, but flat bottom wings, they don't typically like that too much. But all the aerobatics, it's got the capability to do that. One of the things I do with my designs as well is I build washout into the wing, so that helps with even if this airplane would oddly enough tip stall, which I haven't been able to get it to do that, the washout would help let the pilot know before it gets to that point. I've done stall tests, and basically with at a high angle of attack, and the power at idle, it just sort of mushes and drops its nose, and you just apply power and fly out of it. So it's very forgiving. And even with the retracts, trying to keep weight light, the aircraft light, it's about, I think, 11 or 12 ounces per square foot wing loading. So a very nice light wing loading on it too.
When you think about constructing it, do you think that there was any challenges with this one in particular? Anything you want to point out to someone that might be outside the norm, or just maybe just slightly more challenging?
I would say if you've built either one of my Park Flyers or a Gillows model or anything like that, you shouldn't have too much difficulty building this one. It's a little bit different than a Gillows in that, the Gillows, you build the fuselage, the left half over the board, over a keel, if you will. You take that off the board and you add the other half. And you do that, but I've got a slightly different style on how I do that. But I've got pictures of that in the article. And then I also have a pretty in-depth build thread on RC groups that I think we're going to link in the description of this video if you want to go ahead and check it out. So I try and be pretty meticulous. I think I took probably over 1,000 photos during the construction. And so it's more of like just sort of thinning down the ones that are the best to show. So anyone that's looking to build it, the article is pretty thorough, the online, and then also available for download. There's construction notes and covering instructions that you can get as well. So I sort of walk through the various steps to build the model. But I would say, yeah, if you've built a couple of models that are on the smaller side, you should have no problem doing this one.
I don't know if we've ever mentioned when you've been on the show before, but it's kind of interesting that that when I wanted to do a Grumman Goose construction article in the magazine. So I reached out to a friend of mine named Glenn Lewis, who, interestingly, I used to race RC cars with when I was like 7 or 8. He's older than I am, but so I was a kid, and he was like my father's age or thereabouts. And so we used to race cars, RC cars, at a mall, and from there, lost track of him, and then reconnected with him through model airplanes, and didn't realize at first, neither of us realized that, we'd race cars together, because I'd grown up and, he only knew me as a child, like I said, 7 or 8. So I asked Glenn when I wanted to do the Grumman Goose if he had any suggestions on who might do that, and he recommended Paul Coleman. So Paul Coleman did the Grumman Goose, which turns out to be our best seller ever, our best selling plane ever. It just is really interesting and awesome that it turned out that way. So, obviously I'm sure people are familiar with the name Paul Coleman, but then Paul Coleman introduced me to you, Derek, and
Yep.
You have written several articles, and you and Paul have worked on articles together. And then to bring it all full circle, the reason we didn't have a show a month ago is because I was in Florida. Unfortunately, my mother's having some health concerns, and I had to make a trip down there, with little notice. But while I was down there, I actually had lunch with Glenn, and he's very excited about this project and said he's definitely going to build the project. So it's just kind of interesting. I don't think I've ever shared that story, but how the hobby works and networking works, and there's a very many people that I was involved in when I was with hobbies as a child. Like there was another gentleman I raced RC boats with, same age, maybe 8 to 12, and his name's Charlie, and reconnected with him in model airplanes as well. I mean, I think it's cross-pollination, but I think it's really great, that through Glenn, he connected me with Paul, and Paul's just provided us a new construction article on a P40. So that's really exciting. And, you've actually written more than Paul, Derek, but and you all have worked together. So I think it's really great that that's all come together. And obviously it's exciting to share your new articles and your new construction articles. What else would you like to share specifically about this project? Is there anything you want to show on screen, or is there anything more you want to share about this project?
Well, sure. I'll show you a couple more details. So we mentioned the Kble Wagon, or Kble Wagon, how you pronounce it. This is that model, and it's just made from cardstock that you print on your printer and fold it together. And nice thing about this, the full-size design, is it's very square and angular, which is not unlike a lot of German designs of that time period. But I think I built this in an evening, and you just use PVA or white glue, Elmer's glue, and it goes together pretty quickly. And then I'll go ahead and I'll show you the cockpit to this model. So first I'll show you is the canopy itself. And like the other park flyers that I do, this canopy is not vacuum formed. It's made from flat sheet. So there's templates included with the overall design on how to do this. And what's really nice is you make the paper framing first, and there's an inside and outside. So if you look at it from the underside, probably not the easiest to see in the camera, but it's not white paper. There's an actual interior color to the framing. Then you cut out all the glass panels, if you will, and then you glue that frame over basically like 3 mil clear sheet. So remember those old report covers you had to turn in school? Had that little clear plastic sheet on the front of it. That's basically the same thickness. And then you can form it and use canopy glue to attach it to the frame itself. So that's what I've done for this and some of my other park flyers. And I do offer 2 different canopy frame types with the plant. So this one, like the full size, has sort of a curved top edge, and I was able to create that. It's a little bit more to do, a little more, test fit before you glue, but I think it turns out really nice. But I also have one where it's just a straight top, and so you only really make the canopy out of 2 pieces and for that one. And then probably not the easiest to see. See if I can hold this in a different angle. There is an instrument panel that you can make. Again, you print that on cardstock and you can glue it in place. And the other thing is there is a cockpit in this model. And so it's not, I don't overdo it so far as detail, because these are supposed to be sport, fun airplanes, but a little bit of detail does go a long way. And also there's a profile pilot that you can print up. You do that on standard paper, and again, there's instructions included on how to do all that. But all these little things, they add just more character to your model. So you can put some of it, you can put none of it, whatever you want to do. But I wanted to give that option to the builders out there.
One other thing I actually didn't tell you before the show, but I was thinking about it as you were talking, is Glenn, when I had lunch with him about 3 weeks ago, he said your idea of using the exam paper was genius. So, if anybody watches or has watched any of the previous videos, they'll know about that. But just in case this is the first time watching, why don't you take us through just briefly about that process?
Sure. So referring to the exam table paper, like when you go to the doctor's office, they got the bed or whatever you're going to sit on. They've got the paper that they roll out, and they usually have it in a big long ream. That is not too far off of modeling tissue. It's a little bit heavier, a little bit more dense, but it also accepts the color with better saturation. So I've done with regular free flight modeling tissue, and it becomes a little bit translucent, and whereas this paper is a little bit thicker. It doesn't shrink as much, but it will shrink. And I found it works really great. And you can pick up a roll for it off of, either Amazon or one of your local stores for like $20-30. I've experimented. They call it crepe, like crepe paper, but that's the type of paper that it is. They also have a smooth. And so if you're doing something like, like a jet or something like that, and you're wanting to have a real smooth or shiny finish, I'd recommend the smooth, if you will. If you're going to go with more of a flat color, then crepe is just fine. And what you do is you cut out your crepe paper sheet, your exam table paper sheet, to the size of either 8.5 by 11 or 8.5 by 14. I typically do the legal size so I can get bigger panels on in one sheet. And using spray adhesive, you dust coat the carrier sheet and then apply the tissue over the top of that, and then just feed it through your machine.
Well, it works really well, and I think you've used it on most, if not all, of the projects, haven't you, for the park flyers?
Yeah, everything starting from the P60, the P40 on, I used that. And I've been really happy with the quality of it, the opaqueness of the tissue. Like, you can still see some of the structure underneath on lighter colors, but on darker ones, like on the Dornier, you really can't see the stuff through it. So, depending on what you want to do, what look you want, if you're wanting to look more, like the full size, I would recommend the exam table paper.
Excellent. Is there any other topics that we should touch on this project before we start to talk maybe about your next build and what aircraft people can choose from?
I think we should jump into that. I'm pretty excited about the poll and hearing what other modelers are interested in seeing.
Well, I think we have some photos of some of the models. If you want to start to take us through what people's options are, that would be great.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and we'll start on the upper left hand of the screen, which would be the Corsair, or the F4U Corsair, from the American option. So I wanted to have a couple of different options from different countries. And some of the ones I wanted to try and offer were less modeled aircraft. I tend to like to do those more than, say, a Mustang or a Spitfire, although I'm sure I'll do one of those at some point in time. So for those that are less familiar, the Corsair is the American airplane. Was a naval aircraft, fighter aircraft, and it had its like the Stuka had the gull wings. So if you look at the front of the airplane, it's almost like a flattened out W. And it was intended to be, from the outset, to be a very fast aircraft. So they put the R2800, which was one of our big radial engines at the time, in the nose of it, and had to put a huge propeller to be able to harness all that horsepower. Well, one of the differences between land-based aircraft and carrier-based aircraft is, of course, carriers, they're landing, they're putting a lot of strain on those landing gears. So the longer the landing gear, the more beefy, if you will, the structure has to be, and that in turn adds weight, which again in turn impacts performance. So the most common explanation of why Vought did this in their design was the gull wing allows for a shorter landing gear, which means it doesn't have to be as structurally robust as if it was, let's say, like on a Thunderbolt. The other thing that's sort of lesser known is it also was an aerodynamic benefit. So again, the airplane the designers were looking for speed. I think it was one of the first, if not the first, American fighter planes to break the 400-mile-an-hour mark. But the way that a wing is mounted in comparison to the fuselage actually can create a lot of additional drag. So when you look at, say, like the Dornier or a Mustang or P-47, the wing is mounted on the bottom of the fuselage. And that's why they have those really large wing fillets on them. So you look at like the Spitfire has very pronounced wing fillets. And that's to help reduce the turbulence that's created when the wing meets the fuselage. When you look at the Corsair, however, from the front, that fuselage, it's kind of that oval shape, those wings basically come out straight or perpendicular from the side of the fuselage cross section. And that has been found to produce a much lower drag coefficient, or creates less drag based on how it's positioned. So that was also one of the benefits of having the wings orientated the way that they are. So for those of you who remember, it was the star of the TV show Baba Black Sheep. It was, I think, during the 70s, and of course they had a lot of the movie Tora 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 aircraft utilized in it, as well as they would occasionally do some film borrow and put that in the series. But that's the Corsair. It was a unique aircraft. It started before the war. It saw service in Korea, and I think had a 12-year production run, so pretty long for a piston-powered aircraft.
I'm glad that you mentioned Baba Black Sheep, because I was going to mention that. I actually watched it in elementary school, and it was very popular at the time, obviously talking about Pappy Boyington and all the other pilots that flew. I believe they were called the Black Sheep, weren't they?
Yep.
Yes. So, this is probably, I would assume, of all the models that you picked, Derek, this is probably the one that most people would be familiar with. But definitely take us through. It's great for you to give us an overview of each one.
Sure. Well, what do we got next on the list? Yes, the P-39 Air Cobra. So this was another American aircraft that was designed before World War II started. One of the unique features, actually it had several unique features, but one of them was the engine was actually mounted behind the pilot. So like the P-63, which came after it, it was a mid-engined aircraft, and there was a shaft that ran underneath the pilot's seat, between the pilot's legs, and went to a gearbox up front. And the other unique feature about the airplane was it had tricycle landing gears. So most fighter aircraft at that time period were tail draggers, where this has a nose gear up front. And then another unique thing about it was it had, some of them had a 20 millimeter cannon and some of them had a 37 millimeter cannon that was firing through the spinner. And so a lot of folks think that, that Bell, who's the aircraft manufacturer, they designed it so because the engine would be behind the pilot. That way they could put the cannon up front. And that's not necessarily the case. The reason that Bell designed it the way that they did was they were looking also for speed and aerodynamic efficiency gain. They figured this was going to be sort of the future, would be mid-engined aircraft. One of the things the airplane did suffer from, though, was its high altitude performance. About as it starts to get above 12,000 feet, the power kind of falls off the cliff. And so in Europe, while the British bought, I think, 500 to start out with, they only equipped one squadron, and they only flew just a handful of missions, ground attack, I think mostly, before they actually transitioned them to Spitfires. So the British had, like I said, a whole squadron of aircraft plus a bunch that were on their way, and they didn't know what to do with them. Well, at the same time, America was getting into World War II, and so these were our frontline aircraft along with the P-40. And some of the British order ended up staying with the United States. So when the war hit, they said, no, we're going to commandeer these aircraft, and they did. But they classed them as P-400s, which is the export version. And just like in Europe, the Pacific tended to be at higher altitudes. And so the Marine and Army pilots that were flying them really struggled to compete against the Japanese. The Japanese, of course, their aircraft were typically more maneuverable, even though the P-39 was quite maneuverable in itself. It just had the distinctive disadvantage of having to try and fight at lower altitudes. So what would happen would be the Grumman Wildcats would be up at a higher altitude. The P-39s and P-400s were at lower altitudes. They wait for the Japanese to attack, and hopefully the P-400s could absorb the attack, and then the Wildcats would roll in and go attack them. So the old joke was that the aircraft was a P-40 with a 0 on the tail for the P-400. Yeah, so not well liked by the Americans in the Pacific theater. But as I mentioned, some of those went to Russia, and the Russians were really happy with the airplane. Some of them considered it the best Lend-Lease fighter they flew. And bear in mind, they didn't have Mustangs. They had Spitfires. Some of them had Thunderbolts. They had Hurricanes. They had P-40s. They really liked the P-39. And it had a lot of creature comforts that they weren't used to, like a heater, like intercoms and radios and that sort of thing. But yeah, it got to be that Bell was hearing so much positive news from the Russian front that some of their top engineers and designers went from the United States all the way to Russia and visited squadrons that were flying the P-40. And if you think about trying to travel from the U.S. to Russia during the 1940s, and then you add a wartime on top of it, they must have really been interested in what the pilots had to say. But so odd airplane in that it was beloved by some and disliked by others. So,
all right, what do we have next?
So one of the things I haven't done in the Park Flyer series yet is a British aircraft. So I chose two. The first one is the Bolton Defiant. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, just think of someone took a Hawker Hurricane and stretched it out a little bit, and they put a 4-gun turret right behind the pilot seat. And that pretty much is what the airplane looks like. Before the war, the British were really hot on the concept of a turret fighter. So I think this was sort of a holdover from the World War I days where, 2-seat aircraft with an observer in the back with a machine gun could be used as both an offensive and defensive type of aircraft. And that was the intent of the Bolton Defiant. So it had 4 303 machine guns in that turret, and the turret could traverse 360 degrees. And there was some interesting structure behind the turret. So there was a sort of this little flap area that would go up and go down depending on if the turret was in use to help improve aerodynamics. Ultimately, the turret fighter concept really didn't work, at least in the way that the British thought it was going to. The first couple of weeks of battle, where the war just started with the Germans, the Bolton hull did okay, but as time went on and as the Germans kind of developed better tactics, they started getting increasingly shot down in numbers. So it wasn't too long before they were used as night fighters, to kind of help guard London and the other cities against the Blitz. And they did pretty well here because of that big turret that could, shoot down bombers with pretty good ease. And that was in part what its original design was. It was to be a bomber interceptor, fly up either underneath or slightly to the side, and then rake the bomber with the 4 machine guns. And they also saw service as target tugs. So while not as glorious as a frontline fighter as it was originally intended, it did show a lot of good service to the British.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The first time I saw this picture, I mean, the gun reminds me of an anti-aircraft gun. What you usually see is an anti-aircraft gun. It's just a very interesting design. So I'm glad you picked it, because I had never heard of this plane until you shared that with me.
It's very unique. And the other thing that was sort of a downside of was, as you can kind of imagine, it was not easy for the gunner to get out of the airplane in a situation of emergency. So quite often the pilot would survive, and the rear gunner would ride the airplane down, unfortunately for that guy. So so the next one would be the Sea Fury, which is a really neat aircraft. One that didn't necessarily see service at the end of World War II. So there was a Hawker Typhoon and the Hawker Tempest, which are similar in design. And the Air Ministry in England had asked for another fighter, land-based fighter. And so the Hawker Fury was designed from that. But at the time that it was coming out, that's when the Meteor was seeing action or getting into service. Jet engines were really becoming the way of the future. And so the RAF didn't really have any interest in it, but the naval RNAF, excuse me, they were really interested in it as a performance, because they needed a high-powered piston aircraft, and piston aircraft were better on aircraft carriers at the time. Jets usually at that point in time, they had trouble landing them on the aircraft carrier, and they had trouble getting them off. So piston was still the way to go. And so basically Hawker took the land-based Fury version and made the Sea Fury out of it. It has a huge radial engine in it, very fast, quite maneuverable. It was a very capable aircraft. It did see service, I believe, in Korea and a couple other smaller engagements, so it does have a combat history. And I want to say that there was some of them used in the Bay of Pigs, but I could be mistaken. And then, of course, you may more recognize it now in Reno, where they're souping these up and modifying them and using them on pylon racing. So it's a lot of interesting history about that airplane.
Very nice.
So moving to Japan, the option that I chose for them would be the Ki84 Frank. And this was a late war Japanese land-based aircraft from the Army Air Force. It was intended to be an air superiority aircraft, and on paper it could have been a serious threat to the U.S. aircraft, like the Hellcat and the Corsair, but specifically the Hellcat. But unfortunately for the Japanese, unfortunately for the U.S., there was a lot of factors that sort of held it back. So, of course, like supplies, metallurgy, that sort of thing struggled, in getting the actual materials to build the airplane. There was also shortages, so there was changes around in the armament of the aircraft. So they had to, instead of leaving it just this type of cannon, they had to switch it out during production. And then, of course, as the war went on, the Japanese pilot training program really fell behind and didn't keep up with quality of the other contemporaries for that time period. And so you had a lot of situations where they may have had a superior aircraft, but maybe maintenance was lacking, pilot training was lacking, and so it didn't change the fortunes of war for the Japanese, that's for sure. But it was one of the few aircraft that could get up to altitude and catch the B-29s. So that was one of the things that it was used against, in home defense. It saw combat against P-47Ns, which is the long-range version of the P-47. It saw against the Mustangs. It saw against the Corsair and the Hellcat, as previously mentioned. So unique airplane. You don't see it modeled too often. And they also have some really brightly colored paint schemes out there for this one too, which I would have found interesting. If you're a low-time pilot, the last thing you want to do is paint reds and yellows on your airplane full of skies of American swarming Mustangs and Thunderbolts, but that's what they did. So from the Soviet Union or Russian campaign, on the Eastern Front, we have the Yak III, which was arguably one of the top aircraft that the Russians fielded during World War II. It was a smaller aircraft, but it had a big engine in it and big firepower. It had a cannon that fired through the nose. And note that it is firing through the nose and the engine's up front. So there was a way. It wasn't just because of like on the P-39 that they had to move the engine. And I believe it usually had one or two cowl-mounted machine guns that fired through the propeller arc. So very, very sporty for its time period. Some of them were made from a mixture of wood and metal. And a lot of the top aces in Russia added their scores with this aircraft, to the point where some of them, depending on which model of Yak it was, there was 1 through I think 9 or 11. That depending on the Yak, the Germans told their lesser experienced pilots, don't bother engaging. If you see that aircraft, you turn and you fly back, because you don't have the skills to be able to deal with it. So it was interesting to see, reading about that with the Yak, where the beginning of the war, where the Germans were ruling the skies, there was a lot of terror built into the Russian Air Force Corps around the capabilities of German aircraft and German pilots. And by mid-war, or the war's end, that had then flipped, and it was really fascinating to see how the tides turn in pretty quickly. And then I think this is our last one. This was the German option. This is the Heinkel HE-100, and really another unique airplane you don't see done too often. So when the German Air Force put in their request for replacement fighter, the one where I think Arado had an aircraft they submitted, the Messerschmitt had the Me-109 they submitted, Heinkel submitted this one. And Ernst Heinkel was the design bureau head, and he basically wanted speed. Like, everything was intended to reduce drag and to add speed. And I think it used the same engine as the Me-109, but I'd have to double check that. But what's unique about this airplane is, if you take a look at it, you don't see any radiators on it. There's no sort of intakes or scoops or anything like that. And that was one of the unique features about this airplane. There was a small radiator underneath the center of the wing, but that was only for the oil. The engine cooling came from evaporation, and the radiators were built into the skin of the wing and the cowling. And so what they would do is they would move the air and the cooling fluid throughout the wings, and the airspeed going over the wings would cool off the water, and it would pump back into the engine. Really an impressive design feature. But interestingly enough, for those ground crew that weren't paying attention, they could burn their hands, their arms, as they were trying to lean on the airplane while it's on the ground and after it had flown. But then in itself, that was the Achilles heel of the airplane, and one of the reasons why ultimately it didn't go into mass production. It was faster than the 109. It was just as maneuverable, but the 109 could take damage in its wings and keep on flying. Whereas any liquid-cooled engine, if you take a hit in the radiator, you're not going to be flying for much longer, because you're going to lose all that fuel or all that coolant. Your engine's going to overheat and seize. Well, if the entire top surface, or the majority of the top surface of the airplane, is your radiator, any damage to your wings whatsoever, even if it's shrapnel, could eventually cause your engine to seize. So Heinkel went back trying to solve that, try to come up with different solutions, but ultimately the 109 was what they went with. They did build a handful of them, and they use them as propaganda aircraft. So there was 3 main squadrons that they made out of sort of the same 12 to 15 aircraft. So the one that I showed pictured here is the lightning flash on the nose. But they also had some other ones that they painted up, and they would publish them in magazines and try and confuse the Allies with this new super weapon that was out there that no one really was seeing. But they did use it also to defend factories. So, the Heinkel factory, these were based out of that, and would scramble if need be to try and protect the factory. So not a lot of information is known if they actually did see combat, but that's the story, is that they were at least prepared to do it if need be.
Well, I actually think you have one more to share with us. Is it the D520?
Oh, yes. My apologies. Yep. The last one would be from France, which was the Detine 520. Detine was one of the big producers of aircraft prior to World War II starting. They had a long line of high-performance fighters. And this was the one that did see production and did see some combat before the French surrender in 1940. And it was the best one that they fielded. Performance was pretty comparable to, say, about like the Hurricane. I think the 109 outperformed it slightly. And what's interesting is this airplane fought on both sides for France. So there was the defense of France, and it was also the Vichy French flew it. And I think in Africa, they flew it in combat there, and so it would come against American and British aircraft as well. But it kind of looks like a racing aircraft to a certain point. It was designed at the outset as a military aircraft, but it has some really sleek lines. The pilot's cockpit is pretty far back, which gives it that sort of that racer look, and it's a very very nice lines on this airplane. Again, you don't see it done too often, so I wanted to make it one of the options.
Well, I think you've given a great overview of each one to give people, things to think about. And so obviously when you do decide which one you'd like, just send me an email. We wanted to make sure to give everyone at least 30 days to take advantage of that. So starting from the 15th when the digital edition came out, and then later this month when print comes out, you'll have through the end of June, till the last day of June, to send in whatever your selection is. So be sure to reach out. And I think it's going to be a hard choice, but if I was selecting one, I think I would select the Bolton Paul Defiant, just because it's such a strange aircraft and I had never heard of it until you made it one of the options.
Yeah, I try to pick, like I said, some things that are not as commonly done and have really good character, and also I wanted to try and choose an aircraft that's not overly complicated. So the Dornier, there's more to it. It's not difficult, it's just a little bit more to it. These are going to be a little bit more, hopefully, straightforward. And so the intent is, again, this would be another park flyer. So the wingspan would be either between 30 or 34 inches, in that range. Obviously that the article will be through Model Aviation. You can get the plans when they're available. I'll do tissue covering, printed tissue templates with that. Manzano will offer the short kit when it's out, and Rabbit Models will do, of course, some of the accessories, so like spinners and wheels and those sorts of exciting things.
Well, I think it is, like I said previously, it is very exciting, and really appreciate you, Derek, giving readers an option, and so that they can pick whatever interests them the most. And obviously it'll be interesting to see, with such a large readership, what project wins out. And I think, will this be the first time that you've built an airplane that you didn't pick?
For the most part, yeah. So a while back, I did one in the 60-inch range, and I did that only on RC groups where this is sort of a bigger audience. So I'm hoping we get a lot of people participating and just sharing their thoughts. And then when the model comes out, I'd really like to see if anybody has, if they're building one and what progress. I've received photos from people that have built the Nate and the P40 and most recently the P38. I've seen a couple of guys have sent me the pictures, and it's really neat to see how they're coming along. And occasionally they'll ask me a question. I'm happy to answer that for them, because I want them to be successful. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of this one.
We are as well. So definitely make sure you email me your choice, and we'll let everyone know once the voting period is over. And it looks like we still have a few minutes, and I think you have you maybe a sneak peek, or you wanted to share something that you're working on for the future. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got two different things I'd like to show with you. So, working with Mark and Rabbit Models, he's been great in helping me get some of these things that are in my head and I've designed on CAD out into an actually 3D printed part. So the first thing that I want to kind of show is on my models for these smaller ones, I use CA hinges, and quite often I'll actually take a CA hinge and cut it down, or if I've got a sheet of CA hinge material, I'll cut it up, and usually they're only about 3/8 of an inch long by maybe 1/8 of an inch wide. And if you've got your sheets of your, let's say this is a spare Dornier 335 horizontal, if you want to hinge that, it's 3/32, and so you can try and carefully eyeball it, and that's what I've done in the past, but I thought there's got to be something a little bit simpler. So we came up with this, and it's a hinge slotting tool. And so there's a little gap right here, and what you do is you slide this over your part, and then there's a little slot right here for your X-Acto blade. And when you put that in there, it cuts a nice safe cut for the hinge, and it also centers it in the balsa. So kind of want to show how that all works. So let's say we've got these two surfaces here that we want to hinge together for the elevator, right? Well, first thing you do is, let's say you mark where you want those hinges to be. So I'm going to go ahead and mark those. Hopefully you can see the pencil lines there for the marks.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, the next thing you do is you use this little cutout. And what that does is you can use that to center on your hinge line. See if I can put that the camera so it's, I'm not sure if it focus or not.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, great. So that's the mark that I made, and that's also where the slot is for the X-Acto. So from there, you just take your X-Acto and just slide it in. I like to do it from both directions. So get my hand out of the way. And with that, you have a nice, probably not going to show up in the camera, it's so small, a nice slot right in the center. So I think I've got a sort of a scrap hinge here. So you can see right there, that hinge is pretty close to, if not right dead center in the slot. So it works really well. The other neat thing about this is there's you can see that kind of that circular cutout. You can put that over here and then put a pen in that and slide it back and forth if you want to mark the center line of it. And he offers this in a couple of different thicknesses. So this is 3/32. There's an 1/8, 3/16, a quarter, and so a lot of different applications you can use that for. And then along with that, the traditional way that I've sanded the leading edges of the model would be to use just a block sander and sand it and rotate it and sand it, rotate it, look at it and sand it, rotate it. But we created this, and it's a form shape sander for smaller aircraft. So you can kind of see that's half circle shape to it.
Yeah.
And it's just a bit of sandpaper on a stick. So then you move it back and forth just a couple of times. And just like that, you've got some nice rounded edges. So depending on how much you want to sand it, you can round it even more. And then there's other sizes that he has. He also has different shapes. So this one is a 90 degree, which ends up creating a 45 degree on it. So if you want a much sharper corner. And I think it makes shaping leading edges much faster, and trailing edges. You just run it around the surface when you're all done, and you're ready to go. So that's a pretty cool set of tools. And there's a couple of different sizes and options that he offers. One thing that I like to do though too is if you can see the hinge that I held up, it's
Yeah.
actually a cardstock one. What I found is if you use the actual CA material for your test, you know, in and out, all that stuff like that, eventually it starts to fray some of the fibers on the hinge itself. And I've had to throw hinges away because they've gotten too worn out. So I just grab some heavy cardstock from, you know, those leaflet things you get in the mail and just cut them to the approximate size. And they're about the same thickness as the CA hinges. And if these get bent up, you just cut another one. You're not wasting hinge material. And the next thing I wanted to show, so the retracts that we talked about on the 335, those are actually mounted directly to the servo. And it works very well. You have a lot of control so far as using your endpoint adjustments. You can change the angle. You can move it all around however you want to. But some retract and landing gear layout, just it doesn't work. There's not enough room within the wing. The geometry is not right. So it got me thinking, well, you know, maybe if I design one of these aircraft that we just showed, if I can't get the servo, what am I going to do? Because I would like to offer a retract option. Well, I don't know if you remember or not. Remember the old blue GWS mechanical retracts that were out? They were okay. They worked pretty well, but you know, since GWS is not around much anymore, finding those is difficult. And I didn't want to try and set everybody up to try and do a hunt on the internet to try and find those. So I wanted to come up with a smaller mechanical retract. And so working with Mark and his team, I came up with this. This is a mechanical retract. The trunnion's not in this one, but to give you an idea of the size, it's pretty small. And this works directly like a standard mechanical retract will work. You use, I think I use 1/32 wire to connect it to the servo. And I do have an example I can show you. So I built a test bed here, wing, to be able to fit it in. So if you can see here, these are the retracts units in, and they're run by a central servo. This is a 9-gram metal gear servo that works pretty well in moving them around. These are of course, the pre-production ones. We've got an updated version that's on its way over to me. I'm excited to try that out. But I can go ahead and power this up for you and show you how it works. Always be safety when storing your batteries. You can see they're pretty tight depending on, you know, the endpoint adjustments. And up they go. And I do have a speed reducer, so that's what this little plug-in is, and that helps to save on the servo and on the airframe of the landing gear going up and down. So any sort of micro retract setups like this, I highly recommend just adding one of those speed reducers in it. So. And these are those 3D printed wheels and rims I was telling you about earlier. So pretty excited about this one. I think it'll be a fun. You can put it on a lot of different applications. Obviously, a lot of the ones that I'm building and I'm designing, if I don't have the direct servo retract setup, that something like this would work. Or if you're modifying, let's say you're doing a Gillows kit and one of the larger ones and you want to put those retracts in it. They weigh hardly anything. I think they're maybe 1 or 2, like 2 grams each. It's really, really lightweight. So you're not adding any weight. I think the only weight you're really adding is the servo itself. So,
well, it sounds like everything but the retracts that you just showed us are available already. Is that right?
Yes. So the hinging tools and the leading edge and trailing edge sanding tools, those are available now. But we should have the retracts hopefully, not too much longer. So, check in on it. The short kit is available from Manzano Works right now. So if you're interested after seeing this video or reading the magazine, you can go ahead and pick up the short kit there. And then do you have the link for if they want to purchase the plans? Or do you want to share where that's at?
Yeah, we can share that. I mean, obviously it'll be in the article in the digital edition and print, but I'm sure we can provide it as well for people that watch this after the fact. Sure.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, that's great. We covered a lot of ground in an hour.
Yeah, we got through it. I was wondering if we would have enough time to cover it all. We got it.
Well, I think it's great that, you're working with Manzano and bringing out some tools for us, because clearly everything that you showed us is going to save time, or, as you mentioned, maybe trying to look for GWS version of that is very hard to find now. And if 100 people want to build one of your models, anything that's left on eBay or out there will be gone, I'm sure. So that's really great that I didn't know that you're working with Manzano, but they're great.
Well, it'd actually be Rabbit for the.
Or sorry, Rabbit. Yeah. Rabbit model.
All the laser cut
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, that's right. Manzano's laser cut. Yeah, sorry. And Rabbit's been doing spinners and other things too that you've been using.
Yeah, and I always try and do something a little bit different for each airplane. So depending on which one gets chosen, there'll be hopefully something a little bit unique for that particular airplane, either in design technique or in accessories.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing yet another build, and I'm excited to see where things go with the selection of your next project. And I appreciate, as always, your contributions to the magazine.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on.
All right. Well, we got to remind people when the next show is, which will be the third Friday of the month. So if I take a quick look here, I didn't jot it down beforehand, but let's see. Looks like it's the 21st. So Friday, June 21st will be the next show. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone on that date, and we will announce shortly beforehand who our guest will be and what we'll be talking about. So, and as I mentioned at the beginning, don't forget to look at the July issue when it comes out for your chance to win that Corsair. I think everyone might appreciate that. And one other thing I'll mention really quick for anybody that might have interest in this, I was going to mention at the beginning, but I failed to mention it. Since the last time we had a show, I found a program that you can watch on Amazon. It might be other places as well. It's called A Toy Store Near You. And it's been very interesting. Obviously, it doesn't really delve with model airplanes, but there could be toy airplanes or collectibles or other toys. And interestingly, they go and visit toy stores all across, not just across the U.S., but in the world. They had one in England and Japan, but most of the episodes are about toy stores in the U.S. And in Kokomo, which is only about an hour and 15 minutes from Muncie, where we are, AMA, they actually did a program on Kokomo toys. And I think they're about a 5,000 square foot toy store. And so everything from the old Kenner Star Wars to Funko Pops and, anything you can imagine, vintage toys and new toys. But anyway, the show, just for those that are interested in those type of topics, the show is great because they go to these stores and they talk to the owners, and sometimes they talk to customers, and they give you a video tour of the show, or of the store, and then they have the store owner or owners pick the 5 things that they like the most that are in their store, and they tell you why. And as I was watching it, different episodes, it's been on for 6 seasons and I didn't even know. And so as I was watching it, I would see certain things that I had as a child that I'd completely forgotten about. But I will warn you that watching the show might cause you to make a purchase, because I did. I saw a like an 18-inch tall Godzilla that was out in 77, 78. It's called a Shogun Godzilla, and they would be sold at toy stores. And I used to bother my parents to get one for me, and they never would. They thought it was too expensive at the time. So I bought one after watching the show because I saw it on about 3 different episodes where they were talking about it. And so it's just right here in the room. It's just off camera. But anyway, so be warned, it's a really fun show, but it might remind you of things that you wanted as a child or had as a child that you no longer have, and you might purchase it. I also purchased a Bindi Frankenstein from 1974. It's the first toy I can ever remember having. And so I found that on eBay and purchased that. So, just be warned. But I just thought I'd mention it if people are interested in toys or collectibles. And in some cases, it is aviation related, but it may not be, depending on the episode. So if that interests you, it's called A Toy Store Near You. Definitely can watch it on Amazon, potentially Prime. I have Prime, but there's probably other places you can watch it. So just something I wanted to mention that might be of interest. All right, Derek. Again, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing everyone again next month.
Thanks so much.